Hello again, and welcome to this final interview in the series Let's Talk, Let's Be Family. I'm joined by Patricia Carroll, and she's Pastoral Coordinator for Evangelisation in the Dublin Diocese. And we're going to talk about the spirituality of the family in the joy of love and the hope that Pope Francis' reflection gives rise to. Patricia, spirituality in the family, not something we're used to hearing, not a phrase that many people would be familiar with. What is the Pope getting at here?
Yes, I agree that spirituality is quite a big word, but what Pope Francis is talking about is really everyday life and the way that love is experienced in the family. And that's in a variety of different ways, you know. So he's trying to help us in this document to connect with the reality of God in the everyday experiences, the joys, the sorrows, the ups, the downs, the pain that's in family life. It's not an easy ride, family life, and just connecting in with the everyday things that happen, family meals, family occasions, growing up, etc. So that's what he really means by the spirituality of family life. And then being able to notice that God is with us on our journey, that God's walking with us on our journey. He's always there.
It's a really important principle in a way that you can say it and it trips off the tongue, but to actually believe that, you know, maybe I'm too tired to pray, but I'm changing a nappy, or I'm getting up in the middle of the night because my child is sick. That he talks about that's an act of love, and where there is love, God is present.
That's right. One of the things that Francis is very keen on is that you don't have to sit round the fire and say the rosary together to be a family that's connecting to God. What Pope Francis is trying to encourage everyone to do is to notice that God is there in the midst of the changing of the nappies. He's there when a child is sick. He's there when someone loses a job. God is walking with us in every aspect of our lives.
And he actually says at one point that that living in that way and in that awareness, because when you're in a family situation, you are called on to think of other people. Your every day is a challenge to put somebody ahead of yourself, no matter who you are in the family. And he says that you don't have to go outside of that to look for a spirituality, that there is where God is, and that he actually says it can lead to mystical union.
Yes, well, I mean, you've got a fabulous saint, Francis de Sales, and he talks about the whole notion of like people in a family situation don't have to behave like monks and nuns, and in fact that God stretches you to grow spiritually through your everyday experiences, and Francis is tuning into this too.
And it's very Ignatian also, which he, as a Jesuit, he would have been trained in that Ignatius, finding God in all things. The other thing that I think that the point he makes, which is interesting, is that the family is the first place of community or communion, that we're not just individuals. Our first experience of living as a community is in the family.
Yes, and in family there's lots of give and take, isn't there? And sometimes there's more take than give, and there's a lot of sacrifice in family life. And so like the basic community that the church believes exists is the domestic church, and that is the family. That's mum, dad and children growing together, giving and taking together, just developing their life together, and that is community.
And there are other types of families as well, where there might be just one parent, somebody has died, divorce, separation or whatever. There are a variety of families, but the working together, nobody is an island, that they have to interrelate with one another, and that's great seed for going into, and he talks about this, if the family can work together, then moving out into the wider society and our wider world. And he talks about that hospitality and the values that are learnt in the family that then need to be spread and seep out into the wider world.
That's right. Where you've got an open table in an open house, you can open your door and walk out into the world and take those values and that way of living to the rest of the world. And I think that's fabulous, that whole idea of the church is a community of communities. So like if you think about a street, every little house with the people behind the door, those are communities, and communities of love, communities of care, communities of kindness. And beyond the door then we go out and we share that with the world. And I think that's a fabulous notion, that community is built by domestic community. Yeah.
And starts with that lovely term, that lovely biblical theme of hospitality. Like
Yes.
being open to, hospitable in our own homes, but then hospitable to the stranger.
Yes, and the stranger is really important. I mean, there used to be, I think, an old Irish tradition that the table was always there for whoever came in the door, and come and sit round the fire. It's that kind of idea that like we're open to everyone in the world, and we're open to enable people to just, I suppose, experience that hospitality of God the Father, Son and Holy Spirit.
And that spreading out into the wider community extends right across the earth, and that theme very close to Francis' heart, care of the earth, care of our common home, looking after the environment.
Yes, that's a really important thing you're bringing up. In fact, it would be a pity to read this document, The Joy of Love, in isolation to the other documents that Francis has written. You know, you've got the joy of the gospel, and then you've got Laudato Si, beautiful document about caring and protecting the earth. But there will be no family for the earth if we don't look after what God has given us. And so that's really, really important to build that into the spirituality of our family way of life. You know, looking after things like recycling, thinking about the impact that our choices make. And that links in very, very strongly again with that whole notion of discernment that Francis is hoping that we will grow in continuously, discerning what kind of impact our choices have on the whole of creation, not just for our small family, our street and our country.
Yeah, and it's something that children are doing in schools a lot, you know, care the environment, as you say, recycling, but also conservation in the home, how much water you use, how much electricity you're using. Yes. And that's a challenge too. So it's that never that the family isn't just some singular nuclear unit, but that we are part of the web of all humanity.
Absolutely, and the church is this image at Vatican II of we're a family of families. And so if you think about that in terms of the planet, the impact that families can make are enormous when they're living intentionally, when they're thinking about what they can do for humanity. It's fantastic.
Because he does say that the family in that living in community is an image of the relationship, the Trinitarian relationship. At the core of everything is relationship.
Yes, everything's about relationship. And you know, meals are very key for families. If you think about the icon of the Trinity, Rublev's icon, you've got at the heart of it an invitation to gather around the table and share food together, break bread together, and break ideas together, break life together. And so that's kind of mirrored in family life.
But what I also like in his reflection in this section, and it comes through the whole of The Joy of Love, is like, it's not apple pie, you know, and mama's home cooking all the time, or Little House on the Prairie. Like, you get this continual sense, and he emphasises it, that family life can be difficult, and that negative things happen, and that is part of the weave and weft of who we are. And he even has good advices for when these things happen, that they are part of the reality.
Yeah. Family life is messy, very messy. If you just imagine getting out the door in the morning, how messy that can be. So yes, that's right. And Francis is very, very aware of that. As a bishop, he was very grounded in the reality of people's lives. You know, he travelled on the bus, he travelled on the train, he sat and he talked to people. He also has kept very close connections with his own family and the reality of their life, which is fantastic. So family life is very messy, but God is in the mess. And that's the challenge, to actually discern that God is walking with us. He's in the mess, he's in the pain. And there's a lot of pain in family life, a lot of pain. But with the pain comes growth too, and Francis does explore that quite markedly in this document.
He also, in talking about the communion, and we are a group, he also then talks about the individual and the importance of the individual. And he says, that allowing the person to be who they are, like the role, even the faith, nurturing the faith, is not about imposing the faith, but nourishing it, allowing it to grow. Because no two people are the same, even in any family, no brother and sister, and we all know about sibling rivalry, and rightly so. Yes. I think that's a very important part of the
yes,
document.
And one of the good things about the document is about how he's really emphasising that we've got to allow each other to flourish and grow as individuals made in the image and likeness of God. And our deepest identity is that identity in God. And he's saying that we need to allow each other to blossom into that, which I think is really fantastic.
Yeah, and it's not in the image and likeness of ourselves or what we as parents would like them to be. It's their deepest identity. And parallel with that, he speaks then about noting that in any marital relationship, how important the closeness, the love of man and wife, the sexuality, of that bonds them.
Yes.
And yet neither is there to utterly fulfil the needs of the other.
Yes, well, I mean, he's got this really important statement that he makes towards the end of the document about how even although there might be this very close union between man and wife, there's the deepest centre in each of the persons that only God is in touch with. And that then makes the relationship quite fragile and respectful, and we never ever know the depth of the person. Only God knows that.
And that leads him on to talk about judging. He's very strong in that.
Yes.
About really, please try to not judge another person, particularly in their frailty, but even if you don't agree with them.
Yes, that's right. I think he has quite a marked emphasis on standing back and not making judgments, but also it's in relationship to knowing yourself. When we know our own weaknesses and our own fragility, we're not in a place to judge others. So, he's very keen on that sense of spirituality that's about self-knowledge and being in touch with your own fragility, so that you can open a space for the other and for the weaknesses of the other.
He talks too about fidelity and faithfulness, and I think that's again an important theme, that the way parents remain faithful to their children, or a man and wife grow old together, having to continually recommit to being faithful. There's times when in everybody's life where you feel, that's it, I can take no more, I've had it with whoever in your family circle. And yet that recommitting to the faithfulness is a real image of the faithful love of God.
Yes, and there's a kind of, it's a choice that you make every day. And I think that's really important. So it's connecting back with that everyday spirituality. Choosing to be faithful. Choosing to walk the extra mile. Choosing to forgive. Choosing to forget. Yeah. Choosing to be flexible. All of those things. Yeah. Very, very important in family life.
Now, you mentioned at the start about finding God in all things, and that it's not necessarily about sitting down praying, but he does also say that if a family could pray together to find little rituals to nourish, as I said, the faith, not to impose it. Hard enough in today's world for a family to find ways of praying.
It is, and it's hard enough even today for families to find space, full stop. you know, without the idea of prayer.
He actually mentions about getting a prayer space. I thought that was a lovely idea, if you had the room, that there'd be a wee quiet space that people could go to.
Yes,
you
and
know.
I think that that's quite Latin American. You know, if you go to Latin America, you'll find that in people's houses. My perspective on that one is, you know, Francis in one of his audiences came out, it was April, it was a couple of years ago, he came out and he said, just at the Angelus, he said there are three very important words in family life: please, thank you, and sorry. And, you know, reflecting on that, those three words could be taken in terms of family prayer. So there are times when, as a family, we're actually asking God for something, yeah? There are other times that the family's very, very grateful that God is being so good and generous to them. And then there are times where the family has to just say sorry and forgive each other. So I think that's a fabulous framework, not just for family relationships, but for family prayer. Please, thank you, sorry. And there's a quality of graciousness about that, you know, and gracefulness about that, that I think is really, really valuable and helpful.
And he also, in that context, talks about prayer also for those who have died. And I think that's a lovely broadening out, because once somebody passes on, really, in society you mightn't see them, they're no longer in the family, but as believing in the community of saints and the communion of saints. So if somebody's lost a child, maybe a miscarriage, a grandparent, a sibling, to know that they too are part of the family here and now, even though they're dead, they're part of that communion, is important.
Yes, well, I mean, bereavement is a very real thing for families, all kinds of bereavement. And when someone passes away, when someone dies, it doesn't mean that they stop being part of the family. You know, they're remembered constantly. They're thought about constantly, and even in that remembering and in the chatting that goes on in the family about the person, that in itself can become a prayer. Yeah.
This document and this reflection of Pope Francis certainly gives rise for hope, the whole joy of love. What's your reflection on it for yourself, Patricia, having read it?
I think it's very real. It speaks to our real lives, and that's why it is so hope-filled. It speaks to the reality of the everyday, and I think he's really trying very hard to help us to notice that God is with us in every aspect of our lives. And that's why I think it's such a hopeful document.